This week on Meet the Press, after Democrats swept key races on Election Day and amid a record-breaking government shutdown, Kristen Welker sits down with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senator James Lankford, plus a Meet the Moment conversation with John M. Chu. This week on Meet the Press. Listen to the full episode now wherever you get your podcasts.
Curses. I've been thinking a lot about them. Not the words, but strings of misfortune that seem to have some supernatural cause. I'm superstitious. My mother's been dead for over a decade, but I still avoid sidewalk cracks. I knock wood a lot. And part of me always kind of believed in the existence of a Kennedy curse, a supernatural explanation for why so many in the Kennedy family have died young.
Tragedy has haunted the Kennedy clan for generations. Navy pilot Joseph Jr. killed in a plane crash during World War II. His sister Kathleen was also killed in a plane crash.
President Kennedy was assassinated today in a burst of gunfire in downtown Dallas. Senator Robert F. Kennedy felled by an assassin.
Since I started learning about the Skakels, I began to wonder, is it possible the Kennedys might have either passed a curse or even caught theirs from their Skakel cousins? We're talking about a lot of generations of Skakels here, so bear with me. First, there's the grandparents' generation, who came of age in the first part of the 20th century. At least in business, Michael's grandfather, George Skakel, had extraordinary luck. So much so that it seemed like every business deal he touched yielded a fresh fortune. He was the founder of Great Lakes Coal and Carbon, which, as I mentioned in the last episode, he would grow into one of the most valuable private companies in America. In 1950, one of his 7 children, Ethel, Michael's aunt, married into the glamorous Kennedy clan. But then George's luck, and it would seem the entire family's luck, ran out. 1955, Michael's grandparents, 63-year-old George and wife Big Ann Skakel, perish when their company plane goes down in Oklahoma. 1966, George's son and Michael's uncle, 44-year-old George Skakel Jr., dies in a small plane crash. Just 9 months after that, George Jr.'s 39-year-old widow, Michael's Aunt Pat, chokes on a piece of shish kebab in the midst of a dinner party at her home in Greenwich. She dies, orphaning the couple's 4 children. And then, in 1973, 41-year-old Ann Reynolds Skakel, Michael's mother, dies after a years-long cancer battle. It would certainly seem like the family had horrible luck. But buried in the New York Times article about Pat Skakel's choking death is a detail about the Skakel orphans, Michael's first cousins, that suggests at least some percentage of the clan's misfortune might have been the result of some congenital recklessness. The article reads, Mark, 13, is still in Greenwich Hospital suffering from cuts and burns he suffered while experimenting with explosives. His sister, Kathleen, 17, has been cleared of responsibility in the accidental death on December 2nd of a child riding in the back seat of an open car she was driving. The child fell out of the car. The story went like this. Thanksgiving, 1966. Michael's uncle George Jr. gave his daughter Kathleen, known as Kick, a Sweet 16 present, a Mustang convertible. With the top down, Kick took 3 daughters of a family friend on a joyride. The youngest, 7-year-old Hope O'Brien, sat on the trunk, her little legs dangling over the back seat. Kick gave the kids a thrill, quickly hitting the gas and brake, rocking the Mustang like a coin-operated kiddie ride. The children screamed with delight, but then Kick hit a speed bump, and Hope O'Brien tumbled off the trunk and fell onto the road, head first, cracking open her skull. A week later, she died. There was no police investigation to speak of, and Kick Skakel was never charged with anything. In fact, on December 1st, 1966, the day after the little girl's death, a newspaper story quoted Greenwich Police Chief Stephen Barron Jr. saying as much. Barron reckoned the real culprit in the tragedy was made of asphalt. Barron deplores road bumps as girl succumbs, read the headline in Greenwich Time. Chief Barron might have been an expert on the subject. His area of expertise in law enforcement was, in fact, traffic control. But it's hard to imagine the hurt this headline must have caused Hope O'Brien's family. To some in Greenwich, the whole thing smelled like a cover-up. It was the first, but not last time, that the Skakels and local law enforcement would be rumored to be in cahoots to cover up a crime. My name is Andrew Goldman. No story I've encountered in my 30 years as a journalist has gripped me by the throat, quite like the murder of Martha Moxley and conviction of Michael Skakel. I think it would be fair to say that this story has become an addiction for me. If I can do justice to this unbelievable yarn, I suspect it will become an addiction for you too. From NBC News Studios and Highly Replaceable Productions, this is Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley murder.
Some 15 Greenwich detectives are investigating the murder. They have questioned hundreds of people and searched the murder site thoroughly. But as of late this morning, they still have no real leads at all to the person who killed Martha Moxley last Thursday night.
There's just no nice way to say it. The Greenwich police, they blew it. And that's the reason we're still talking about the Martha Moxley murder. This is not a controversial statement. Over the years, even some of the department's own ranks have admitted as much. But nobody blew it more than Chief Stephen Barron Jr., who you just heard about in relation to the Hope O'Brien case. The failure was cemented in the first 2 days following the murder. Everybody's heard of the first 48. The theory that if a case isn't solved within 48 hours, the chances of it ever being solved are cut by 50%. Barron, however, seemed to think he was running a marathon, not a sprint. The day Martha was buried, he told reporters, of necessity, an investigation like this one must proceed at a painfully slow pace. Here he is, speaking about the case, also at a painfully slow pace.
The instrument used in the striking of the Moxley girl was a golf club. We know that.
While his force was doing its best to learn on the fly how to investigate a murder, the town hadn't had one in a full 20 years. Barron was telling reporters what so many in Greenwich surely hoped was the case. That Martha Moxley's murderer likely wasn't local, that some deranged killer from some more violent city probably wandered off the interstate and stumbled into Bellhaven with bad intent. But the cops had no actual leads on any out-of-state psychos. So they busied themselves with following up on not particularly plausible tips about Bellhaven outcasts. There was the young woman who was not only a lesbian, but also sold pot out of her dad's guest house. There was the dad of one of Martha's close friends, whose wife told cops that her husband was a drunk who owned golf clubs and was exactly the kind of sick SOB who'd murder a teenage girl. No surprise, the couple soon divorced. As the first 48 came to an end, one of these leads seemed to get Chief Barron to reconsider his outsider theory. His name was Ed Hammond. He was Martha's 26-year-old neighbor. He had graduated from Yale and served in the Army, but had been living at home since his father died 2 years before. Some Bellhaven gossips told police he was a bit of a drinker. Also, neighbors reported, he said really creepy things around women. Margie Walker, daughter of the Beetle Bailey comic strip creator, was Martha's best friend. You met her at the end of the last episode when she spoke of how the case gave her a lifelong distrust of authority. Margie first encountered Ed Hammond at a dinner party at the Moxley house the Friday before the murder, where she and Martha were tasked with serving the guests. Hammond gave her the willies.
It was an adult party, and Martha and I were serving, and you had to walk from the kitchen on this side through the foyer to the living room over on this side. And so we'd walk through with plates of, hors d'oeuvres, and he was kind of sitting there, by the front entrance of the house by himself.
So he's by the door, but inside the house with the girls.
We'd walk past him, and we're like, well, what's he doing here? Like, who is this guy? We didn't know who he was. He was obviously not our parents' age. He wasn't part of the party. But we didn't know why he was there. And he'd kind of watch us as we're walking through with trays of food. And it just seemed very odd.
Remember after Sheila McGuire discovered Martha under a tree, one of the mothers came out of the Moxley home to investigate? That was Margie's mother, Jean, the first adult to see Martha's body. And until her death in 2015, Jean Walker swore she could feel someone watching her at that moment. And whose bedroom window had a direct sightline to the tree? Ed Hammond's, whose family lived right next door to the Moxleys on Walsh Lane. Jean Walker was close with Ed Hammond's mother.
The mother would complain about her son quite a bit, like, oh, Edward, I don't know what we're going to do about him. He steals money out of the women's purses when they're gathered together for a bridge or something, and he apparently got into their purses, and he went and spied on Mrs. Wold, and she caught him looking in the window, and she's like, what are you doing here? He goes, I just wanted to see your dog. I mean, it was just kind of odd behavior. I didn't know this guy. My mother knew the family better. Maybe there were these other details, like he had jars of semen in his room or something.
Tell me about, I keep hearing about the semen. Do you know?
I don't know. I heard that.
This wasn't the first time someone mentioned Ed Hammond's semen to me. But the only reference in police reports I could find is that when the cops searched his room, in a catalog of items found is a reference to 1 box of Trojans, 3 empty, 2 unused or new, 1 used. The cops swarmed the Hammond house on Halloween, took away the condoms, and cataloged his large skin mag collection. They also seized the clothes that Hammond had been wearing the night before, which included, according to the report, 1 pair beige-colored men's corduroy pants, blood-stained left upper leg. It's clear from the reports that the cops were sure they had their guy. And if you ever want to see what tunnel vision looks like in practice, read the police reports on the Moxley case from the first 2 weeks of November 1975. But then, poof, their theory fell apart. Hammond passed a polygraph, and the state crime lab finally reported that the stain on his pants wasn't, in fact, Martha's blood. By mid-November, the cops would have to admit that there was no evidence tying Hammond to the murder. Like the drunk husband and the lesbian pot dealer, the worst crime Ed Hammond committed was offending the sensibilities of his neighbors. Off the list fell Ed Hammond, but there were plenty of oddballs waiting in the wings to take his place. Meanwhile, the clock was ticking. The day after the murder, Police Chief Barron assigned the Moxley case to Captain Tom Keegan. Keegan worked side by side with a flame-haired and bushy-mustached detective named Jim Lunny. Lunny was huge, well over 6 feet with the circumference of a redwood. Lunny relished the role of bad cop. He loved grabbing lapels and shirts almost as much as he loved riding motorcycles, which he did most weekends. Keegan was a former Marine. He had a big helmet of possibly dyed brown hair and smoked cigarettes out of a holder, like FDR. Keegan wasn't quite a good cop, but he was the not-so-bad cop. He was ambitious, a politician. He'd eventually succeed Barron as chief of police, then retire down in South Carolina and serve for many years in the state's House of Representatives. There's actually a stretch of highway named after him down there. Now short on suspects, the detectives decided to concentrate on nailing down a solid timeline. Martha's official estimated time of death wouldn't be of much help. Elliot Gross, the Connecticut medical examiner who performed the autopsy a full 24 hours after Martha was found, had provided a frustratingly broad window, any time between 9:30 p.m. on the 30th to 5 a.m. Halloween morning. So Keegan and Lunny had to narrow it down in other ways. For one, by talking to Martha's friends about the night of October 30th. One thing you have to remember. In 1975, there were no cell phones, so plans would need to be made well in advance to talk at a specific hour, and for both parties to be home and near telephones, which, you might not recall, used to be connected to long curly cords, which I personally can attest were excellent for twirling around 2 fingers or even chewing on while talking. Margie Walker had to spend her mischief night with her younger brother, stuck at a boring meeting for Red Cross volunteers.
So we went to the Red Cross meeting, and I remember saying to Martha, like, I can't believe my parents won't let me go. So when I get back at 9:30, and that was her curfew. She was expected to be home at 9:30. And, I said, you're going to tell me everything I missed, all the fun stuff. So I waited a bit. I didn't hear from her. And then I called her house and her mother said that she wasn't home yet. And I did think that was a little odd at the time. And this is somewhere between like 9:30 and 10. And so that didn't seem right to me at the time.
Martha not being at home by 10 surprised her best friend. She'd broken a phone date. Helen Nix was one of the first to receive a call from Mrs. Moxley later that night. You may recall from the last episode that Martha showed up to the Skakel house with 2 friends, Helen Nix and Jeffrey Byrne. Helen and Jeff sat in the backseat of the Lovemobile, while Martha, Michael Skakel, and eventually Tommy Skakel sat in front. Helen, who owns her own marketing company and is the mother of 3 grown children, lives with her husband in a lovely house just outside the gates of Bellhaven. The day I was visiting, they were dealing with a common Connecticut problem I've dealt with myself, an infestation of cicada killers in their backyard. They're harmless flying bugs, but huge and super gross. But back to 1975. Helen left the Skakel driveway at 9:20 along with Jeffrey Byrne. As Helen was leaving, Martha told her she was right behind her. She'd be heading home soon. But then, Helen picked up the phone in the early hours of Halloween. It was Dorothy Moxley. Helen knew that Martha had been on thin ice with her mom after blowing her curfew not long before.
Okay, and so eventually Mrs. Moxley calls you, yes? It says, Martha's not home. Is she there with me? And I was like, no, she's not here. And that's when I told her to call the police. I thought she should call the police.
Why did you think that she should call the police?
Because Martha had to be home. She was leaving when I was leaving. She was leaving right after me. Yeah. And the fact she wasn't home, and I know she wouldn't have broken curfew again.
Martha had broken curfew a few nights before her death and knew she couldn't mess with her mom again.
She knew she had a curfew. She knew she had to get home.
Margie might have been surprised, maybe a little peeved, but Helen was alarmed by Martha missing curfew again, which seemed so out of character. The friends compared notes and agreed that whoever had attacked Martha must have done it not much later than 9:30. In the days after the murder, Helenix had a terrible realization, one that seemed to narrow the time frame of the attack even further. Shortly after returning from the Skakels, Helen telephoned her friend Melissa. Just as Melissa was saying she had to hang up for her 10 p.m. curfew, all hell broke loose.
Oh, I was talking on the phone, and the dog was like going berserk. And so I went out to go call the dog.
Now, your dog's name was Zoc, right?
Zoc.
Was there anything different about what Zoc was doing that night versus...
He was very agitated and barking. He literally never stopped barking. And he never did that. I mean, they bark when people go by and things like that, but not as agitated. And he would call the dog would not come in, which is really, really unusual. We still have the same dogs, and they're very obedient.
What kind of dog is it?
Australian Shepherd. And he wouldn't come in. And I kept screaming, and then we had always had a live-in nanny, but then we had an extra babysitter because my parents were traveling. And she's like, you have to come in. And so, I went in, but the dog was just like crazy, and I couldn't get the dog in. The dog always came in. I could call Zach, he always came in. And he didn't come in. And he was frozen in a spot, like in the end of the driveway, in the middle of the road, looking at the tree where her body was found. And that's where he was, and he didn't move from there.
The Ix house is directly across Walsh Lane from the Moxley house. Upon hearing Helen's story, Keegan and Lunny consulted a local vet named Dr. Edward C. Fleischley. According to the police report, Dr. Fleischley stated that all indications given, the Ix dog witnessed part and or all of the murder. He further stated he would be unable to state whether the Ix dog knew the attacker. In her dining room in Greenwich 49 years later, Helen hasn't deviated an inch from her conviction that her dog witnessed Martha being attacked.
And I'm positive that's when it happened. It makes no sense otherwise.
Margie, too.
So I definitely believe in that timeline. I believe in the dogs barking and everything like that. It just makes total sense to me.
Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny believed it as well. After sending the entire case file to him, they shared this opinion on a late November 1975 call with Dr. Joe Yahimchik, the chief medical examiner of Harris County, Texas, which encompasses Houston. Dr. Joe, a Connecticut native, was an internationally renowned forensic pathologist with both medical and law degrees. Here's Lunny.
We have a couple of neighborhood dogs born. That's why we believed it would be around 10 o'clock.
Dr. Joe, who was considered a god in the world of forensics, concurred. Even Dorothy Moxley agreed. Just before 10 o'clock, she was in the master bedroom, painting some trim, and she reported hearing voices and dogs barking. And the more she considered it, perhaps even screams. So in 1975, it was unanimous. Martha's closest friends, the cops, a dog expert, and even her mother agreed she'd been attacked at about 10 p.m. Investigating the case over 40 years later, I agree too. Because the cops botched so many things, as tempting as it might be to say that they blew this part of the investigation too, I just can't. I've turned it over in my head 1,000 times and have come to believe that the attack almost certainly occurred around 10 and not significantly later than that. Why do I believe this? Because of some of the findings of the medical examiner. Martha's hymen was intact when she died. No semen was found inside her or fluoresced on her skin. Toxicology found no drugs or alcohol in her system. Nobody'd seen her in the neighborhood. If Martha had been attacked at, say, 11:30, 12, or 1, where in the world was she hiding? And remember how cold October 30th was. If she wasn't having sex, eating, drinking, or smoking pot, what could she possibly be doing on that 40-degree night? Keep this in mind. Eventually this timeline's gonna come under some significant scrutiny. But in 1975, everyone, including Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny, felt confident of the time of the crime. Now came the hard part. There's a good reason murder mysteries aren't called whodunits. If Martha had last been seen at 9:30 and was attacked at 10, Keegan and Lunny knew that they needed to drill down on every detail of Martha's last known whereabouts. You might recall from the last episode that on November 15th, Detective Lunny brought 6 of the Skakel siblings to the police station to get their stories on tape. As they sat through those interviews, the police honed in on one crucial fact. As all the other kids hanging around the Skakel driveway dispersed, leaving Martha behind, one boy stayed with her. The Skakel siblings who were in the driveway told the cops as much, and so did their cousin Jimmy Terrian, not to mention Helen Nix and Jeffrey Byrne. The boy in question didn't dispute it either, telling cops he was alone with Martha Moxley at 9:30. Then, he said, she headed for her house.
Did she say anything to you when she left? I'm going to visit somebody, or I'm going someplace. Do you know for a fact that she said to you, I'm going home?
No, she didn't say she was going home.
She didn't say she was going home?
No, she said that, I just sensed that she was going home.
You sensed that she was going home?
Yeah.
That voice you just heard? That was Tommy Skakel.
I'm Julio Vaqueiro, anchor of Noticias Telemundo. You can watch Dateline, the hit true crime series on Telemundo. And now, you can listen to Dateline as a podcast. Stories of love and betrayal, of secrets revealed, of the men and women who stand between evil and justice. Every twist and turn can now be heard in Spanish, with new mysteries arriving every week. Just search Dateline en Español wherever you get your podcasts and start listening.
The murder of an 18-year-old girl in Graves County, Kentucky went unsolved for years, until a local housewife, a journalist, and a handful of girls came forward with a story.
America, y'all better wake the hell up. Bad things happens to good people in small towns.
Listen to Graves County on the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. And to binge the entire season ad-free, subscribe to Lava for Good Plus on Apple Podcasts.
I'm Jake Halpern, host of Deep Cover, a show about people who lead double lives. We're presenting a special series from Australia. It's all about a family who was conned by a charming American.
When you marry someone, you feel like you really know them.
I was just gobsmacked as to what's going on here.
Does the name Leslie Manookian mean anything to you?
Oh, you bet. Never forget her.
Listen to Deep Cover Presents Snowball, wherever you get your podcasts.
Given the facts of the case, it's surprising that Tommy Skakel didn't become the police's prime suspect immediately. As you might recall from the last episode, the day after the murder, Detective Lunny discovered a Tony Penna 4-iron in a bin in the Skakel's back hallway, plausibly the sister club of the murder weapon. But Chief Barron, in those first 48, when he was convinced the murderer came from out of town, downplayed the significance of the 6-iron's provenance. Barron told the assembled press on November 1st, kids are always leaving bicycles, tennis rackets, golf clubs outdoors after playing with them on the lawn. His point was that the Tony Penna had probably just been a convenient weapon of opportunity. But Barron's gut couldn't really compete with the reality of the situation. Here's how Captain Keegan put it to leading forensic expert Dr. Joe.
Well, here's the position we're in. You know, there is this individual is the last to see the victim. He has access to what we think is the weapon. We think that weapon came from his house. It's circumstantial, very circumstantial, and he's got opportunity.
The facts of the case traveled quickly amongst the Bellhaven teens. Kids like Chris Gentry, who'd been out with other local boys egging cars on mischief night, educated the cops on the wild, almost feral nature of the Skakel kids and the rep they developed at their school.
Kind of weird, just like the way the family is. Like, when you think about the Skakel family picture, the kids are really like I've seen, the little kid, I've been walking by the house and put a slingshot right to my face and told him he was going to shoot it off. The guy I told you about, he used to work at Brunswick, the photographer, he told me, he hates the Skakels. Because they're just, a bunch of rotten kids. They're so rich and everything, they just don't care about anybody. They just, do what they want to do, so.
Back on Halloween, Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny deposited Tommy in the back of a cruiser, brought him downtown to HQ, and put him under the bright lights. Lunny must have had an excellent opportunity to use his bad cop routine to pressure Tommy into confessing. But Tommy, as Lunny told Dr. Joe, he was as cool as a cuke.
I mean, we've talked to him for one period of time for almost 3.5 hours. We tried to even surmise how it happened and tried to put him into that category. We went into the sex relationship. Everything we tried, and he didn't budge. No sweat, no perspiration. His Adam's apple never even moves. His hands don't even move. He just sits there nice and calm. He doesn't stutter. No stammering, nothing. Very calm, cool, and collected.
Tommy stuck to his story. He had no idea what happened to Martha that night. He said goodbye to her at 9:30, watched her walking off towards her house, and went inside to do his homework. Apparently nothing about Tommy alarmed the detectives the way Ed Hammond's Skin Mag collection and used Trojan did, because after that interview, they made no effort to collect or even inspect the clothes Tommy had worn the night before. If his demeanor suggested innocence, his polygraph confirmed it, to the cops at least. I spoke to one of the world's foremost polygraph experts, and we're going to be talking a lot about them and how seriously we should take their results in the next episode. But the Greenwich cops seem to treat it as an infallible investigative tool. A lot of neighborhood kids got strapped into one. Even though investigators didn't suspect them of anything, it was as if that magic box could solve the case for them. Kumo, the Belhaven son of a surgeon, who in the last episode described how magical and cool Martha was, even got a turn in the chair.
Look, they were really cool about it, if I remember correctly. It didn't bother me at all. A lot of it wasn't, did you do it? A lot of it was, do you know who did it? And that's a perfectly normal thing to ask a bunch of kids in a situation like this.
Tommy actually got strapped in twice. As Captain Keegan told Dr. Joe, the first polygraph was a wash and deemed inconclusive.
Jim, let me tell you, I got the thing right here. The first one was on the 3rd of November, and the second one was on the 9th of November.
Right, so 6 days later.
Right.
When they gave him the first polygraph examination, they said to us that he was completely drained. They were getting nothing. They were getting no reaction. In other words, he wasn't even moving the needles. But he was completely drained. They said it was like he was up for days.
But he's abnormally calm.
The November 9th poly examiners reported that on the retake, their machine judged that Tommy was being truthful when he said he didn't know who killed Martha or the location of the missing golf club head. Greenwich police decided to give it one more shot. 6 days later, Tommy was back at the station fielding their questions.
Did you see anyone attack Martha?
No.
Do you suspect anyone of hitting her?
No.
Did you hit her?
No.
Based on the poly and Tommy's consistent denials, Keegan and Lunny moved on. Tommy seemed to have dropped off the suspect list altogether. But meanwhile, the investigation was going nowhere. And in December, Keegan and Lunny happened to be re-interviewing Helen Ix. That's when she recalled a detail that hadn't come out in her previous interview. Tommy and Martha had been flirtatious on mischief night shortly before the murder, but also physical. Keegan wanted to know more.
I'd like to have you tell me.
I don't know, people were just fooling around, and I guess Tom pushed Martha in the bushes.
Okay. What bushes are you talking
The
about?
Saxander light.
Okay. And he pushed her in there?
Mm-hmm.
Did she fall down or
Yeah, she fell and she got up again.
Okay, no.
I think she got up.
Okay.
And that's when we left.
The pushing and screaming was clearly playful. So playful, in fact, that Helen felt uncomfortable sticking around for what looked to be moving towards a makeout session. So she and Jeff Byrne took off for home. But police wondered if this could be evidence of something more sinister brewing. Without telling him what it was about, detectives summoned Tommy back to the Greenwich Police headquarters. I imagine that the cops told him that owing to his past poly, he was no longer a suspect. If I had to guess from reading the report, Tommy was surprised, perhaps unprepared, to be confronted with questions about the pushing. The report reads, Tom was interviewed at length regarding the incident of pushing Martha, and he related at first that he did not remember, and then later on related that he did push her in a joking manner, and that she tripped on the steel curbing and stumbled into the Pachysandra patch. Tom related that the incident was very foggy, and the whole situation was very unclear. Then, Detective Lunny sprang something else on Tommy. They'd interviewed Ken Littleton, the Skakel's 23-year-old tutor/minder. Ken told him at 9:45, he walked all around the house and poked his head into each of the rooms. He climbed the stairs to Tommy's third-floor bedroom, empty at 9:45. If Tommy had, like he said, come into the house at 9:30, but wasn't in his bedroom at 9:45, the approximate time of the murder, where was he? And what possible motivation would the tutor have to implicate Tommy in such a way, they must have thought? On this question, Tommy's memories were considerably more clear. He told Lunny that after saying goodbye to Martha, he went up to a guest room on the third floor to find a book about Abraham Lincoln and log cabins he needed for an extra credit paper for history class. That's where he must have been when Ken found his bedroom empty. Keegan and Lunny made a note to check with Brunswick about this Lincoln paper, and with the Greenwich kids about this odd teen whose memory only sometimes seemed to work. Detectives were starting to eye Tommy. He'd gotten eyed a lot, but in a totally different way, by a lot of flustered Greenwich girls. Tommy was considered the hot Skakel brother, especially among Martha's 15-year-old cohort. One former classmate told me he remembered Michael seemingly always having a snot-crusted nose, but his brother Tommy, by contrast, consistently looking dapper, put together. Here's Martha's friend Helen Ix again.
I mean, I think so many people had a crush on Tommy. So, he was a good-looking guy in the Gucci shoes, and he was extremely popular. He was older.
In photos, he's always smartly dressed. He has longish curly hair that looks like it's dying to become an afro, but Tommy did his best to fight nature and tame it with a side part. But as Kumo said in the last episode,
Tommy was different. He never really seemed like one of the gang. You know what I mean?
There may be an explanation for that. Remember Hope O'Brien, who fell out of the car Kix Skakel was driving in 1966? 4 years before, in Greenwich, Tommy, just like Hope O'Brien, had fallen out of a moving car. It happened around 1962 when Tommy was 4. Cops tracked down the Skakel's former chauffeur to recount what happened. James Marr, who went by Bunny, remembered that it occurred while he was driving on Field Point Road, the main artery connecting Belhaven to the rest of Greenwich. 4-year-old Tommy and 5-year-old Julie were riding in the back seat. As the police report reads, Mr. Marr was not sure who opened the door, allowing Tommy to fall out. Here are the cops filling in Dr. Joe on their findings.
And right now we're going in a psychological background. We've got a release on records. And it was a head injury and problems in school, problems concentrating.
He fell out of a car and fractured his skull. Approximately 5 years old, he started going through temper tantrums. As he got a little older, into 8 years old, they got worse. Sometimes they'd last for 3 hours, destroying things. He was taken to a neurologist, which we just found out today, so we haven't really talked to him. And he had a lot of guidance work. Last year, while he was in the 10th grade, he was doing 6th grade work.
He's a very emotional child.
Right. Bedwetting, nail biting. There's so many things that, are starting to come out now about him.
The cops learned that after the accident, Ann Skakel hoped prayer would take care of Tommy's problem.
This is a Roman Catholic family.
Oh, you mean the neurologist, yeah.
Yeah, but this is a Roman Catholic family that seems to think that they can pretty much handle everything with religion. When we talked to a doctor yesterday, he told us that the mother was extremely religious.
Right.
And they have religious relatives.
Right.
And this was the thing that they sort of said was a stage in his life, and it would pass by.
And I think they were relying on the religion part of the family to maybe bring him through his 5 years old to 10 years when he was giving them this trouble. They figured maybe it would wear out.
But Tommy's issues persisted beyond childhood. During my reporting on this case, I've come across multiple references to his history of violence. Police learned that in one instance, it's unclear exactly when, Tommy was accused of slashing a painting with a broom handle. But mainly, he terrorized his siblings. According to Michael, Tommy once stuck a fork in their brother John's forehead while at the dinner table. But his favorite target was Michael. One time, Tommy chased Michael around the house, threatening to bash him with a large glass ashtray. I spoke to one of Michael's Belhaven friends, who asked not to be either recorded or identified. He described an incident that occurred sometime around 1975, when Tommy pounded on Michael's bedroom door in a rage, so hard that he feared the wood would splinter. The exact words he used to describe teenage Tommy? A scary, scary dude and very, very strong. The stories police collected about Tommy were compelling. Behavioral troubles, horseplay with Martha the night of her murder.
Tommy pushed Martha into the bushes. Okay.
On December 16th, just a few days after Tommy told them about the Abe Lincoln report, Keegan and Lunny had hot-footed it over to Brunswick. Tommy's teachers were mystified. A paper about Lincoln and his logs? No such thing was either assigned or submitted, they told them. Whether he remembered committing the crime or not, Tommy had lied to them about his whereabouts at the time of the murder. And given Tommy's poor academic performance, an extra credit paper was a pretty weak lie at that. But it was a fabrication nonetheless, one that Tommy had delivered straight-faced to investigators. Suspicions were starting to stack up.
This individual is the last to see the victim, the weapon. We think that weapon came from his house. And he's got opportunity.
On February 3rd, 1976, Dr. Joe weighed in with his written conclusions about the case. Quote, "The facets of this case suggest that Martha Moxley's attacker had a probable unstable personality, homosexually inclined, either panicked following what may have started out as a prank or became so angry upon being rejected that he engaged in an overkill. The probability of this being the act of a stranger is, in our opinion, very remote." End quote. There was no other way that Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny could interpret Dr. Joe's conclusions. Tommy was their guy. It made sense. Tommy was no stranger to Martha. It all began with a prank, Tommy pushing her into the bushes. The flirtation looked to be heading towards a proposition. Given his established anger issues, how might Tommy have reacted had he been rejected? Dr. Joe wrote that the Greenwich cops had put too much stock in the past polygraph, especially given that Tommy had a week to prepare between the two. Dr. Joe wrote that it was possible Tommy had consciously set out to beat the poly. But he also offered an alternative explanation, writing, "Even if he has knowledge of the crime, he may have developed a bona fide amnesia about the events that occurred during the evening of the young lady's death." When I first read Dr. Joe's theory that Tommy might have killed Martha and forgotten it owing to amnesia, it seemed absurd, like a plot line from a Lifetime movie. But he did initially tell cops he'd forgotten all about shoving Martha. Given his injury, could he have both forgotten pushing her into a bush and also forgotten beating her to death with a golf club? And then I came across this bone-chilling line from a police interview with Bunny Marr, the former Skakel chauffeur. Mr. Marr further related that Tom would also be subject to periods of time when he would just stare into space and not remember anything. The final straw for Greenwich investigators might have been on April 10th, 1976, when the Skakels gardener, Franz Wittine, was summoned to HQ to sign a written statement. While there, Wittine casually relayed to investigators that on several occasions he'd observed Tommy leave the Skakel house to go walking, taking with him a golf club. An arrest felt imminent. It looked like they'd have the whole thing wrapped up by Easter. Tommy would be locked behind bars. All they had to do was make sure their case was airtight.
I turned off news altogether.
I hate to say it, but I don't trust much of anything.
It's the rage bait.
It feels like it's trying to divide people.
If we got clear facts, maybe we can calm down a little.
NBC News brings you clear reporting. Let's meet at the facts. Let's move forward from there. NBC News, reporting for America.
Danger lurks in the American landscape.
No one in their right mind would be out here, which makes it the perfect place to kill someone.
Introducing Hot and Deadly from ID, your podcast for classic American true crime served with a side of biscuits and gravy. On each episode, you'll hear some of ID's most shocking stories of murder and betrayal, from the mystery of a preacher shot and killed by a bow and arrow to a former prom queen gone missing and found murdered. Listen to Hot and Deadly on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey guys, Willie Geist here, reminding you to check out the Sunday Sit Down podcast. On this week's episode, I get together with Saturday Night Live star Bowen Yang to talk about his extraordinary road as the son of Chinese immigrants to SNL and that dream role in the Wicked movies. You can get our conversation now for free wherever you download your podcasts.
I want to pause a moment to talk with you about technology and how it affects this case. it's something I think about a lot. I imagine if you're listening to this, like me, you're probably interested in true crime, and therefore understand technology's importance in cracking cases and securing convictions. Serial's Adnan Syed was convicted of murder partly through geolocation. His cell phone data suggested that he was near his ex-girlfriend's burial site. My recent true crime obsession, Low Country, South Carolina sociopath Alex Murdaugh, was buried by technology in his double murder trial.
Prosecutors argue a cell phone video taken by Paul Murdaugh places his father, Alex Murdaugh, at the crime scene minutes before he and his mother were murdered.
Defense attorneys might challenge interpretation of electronic signals, but the data supplied by modern technology provides something approaching objective evidence. I was born in 1972, so I can't say I remember much about 1975, but I do know all about the cool stuff we have now that we didn't have back then. In 1975, not only were there no cell phones or ring cameras or onboard car computers, there was barely even cable television. It existed but wasn't yet widely adopted. CNN wouldn't launch for another 5 years. The only objective technological data that Greenwich cops had at their disposal came from the same low-tech TV of my childhood. Growing up, I remember crabby teachers referring to TV as the idiot box. But in this case, it provided the most intelligent evidence available, the closest thing to geolocation that existed on the night of October 30th, the night that Martha Moxley was killed. TV, being the only screen in existence, was an essential part of life in the 70s. Kids planned their lives around watching their favorite shows. Julie Skakel was no different. From 9 to 10 p.m. on October 30th, NBC aired Ellery Queen. The formula was that every episode, someone would die a violent death, and every week, the eponymous young mystery writer/detective would solve the crime in the last 10 minutes of the show. Julie Skakel watched Ellery Queen the night Martha was killed, and her movements were dictated by her desire to catch the big reveal of the murderer. On the show, that is. The Skakel boys had different viewing plans that evening.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus.
Rush Skakel Jr. had been turned on to British comedy troupe Monty Python at Dartmouth and wanted his brothers and cousin to check out their series. So they planned to watch it at their cousin Jimmy Terrian's house together. It aired on PBS from 10 to 10:30 p.m. If you were anyone else in Greenwich in front of a television set on the night of Martha Moxley's murder, you were almost certainly watching The French Connection on CBS. Airing from 9 p.m. until 11:07, the Gene Hackman detective drama that swept the 1972 Oscars featured, in the words of October 30th's Greenwich Time, one of the best chase sequences in the history of film. But it wasn't the subject matter of any of these shows that was of interest to Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny. It was when the programs aired that was complicating their perfect theory. In the same interview when Ken Littleton, the tutor, reported that Tommy wasn't in his bedroom at 9:45, he added that he did, however, recall seeing Tommy shortly after that. Ken recalled having The French Connection on TV in Rush Sr.'s room when Tommy came in. Just before the beginning of the famous chase scene, Tommy plunked down and watched it, then left right after it ended. The cops learned from CBS that the chase scene began at 10:26 and ended at 10:33. In the same interview, when Tommy introduced the imaginary Lincoln paper, without prompting, he too mentioned watching a bit of The French Connection with Ken, then returning to his room at about 10:30. Even more importantly, Ken recalled nothing out of the ordinary about Tommy's appearance. Tommy seemed relaxed, and to the best of Ken's recollection, he was wearing the same clothes he had on at the Belhaven Club, minus jacket and tie. He was not covered head to toe in blood, as Martha's murderer would be expected to be. CBS had thrown Tommy a lifeline. Now it was NBC's turn, with an assist from a forgetful sister and a sticky door. Recall Julie Skakel was watching Ellery Queen, which ran on NBC from 9 to 10. Her friend, Andy Shakespeare, who had joined the Skakels for dinner at the Belhaven Club, needed a lift home before it ended. So Julie decided to run Andy home during a commercial break, so she could race back home to see the killer unmasked. Julie's station wagon was parked in a spot that afforded her a clear vista to the front door of the Skakel house. The two girls hopped in the car, but then Julie realized something, which she related to detectives during her November 15th, 1975 interview.
I guess somewhere in between about 9, 10 or so. Then I went back on the porch and I said, Connie, we've got to go.
In case you couldn't quite make that out, Julie says she went back to the porch and told Andy they needed to go.
It was about 9:30 when Andy and I got in the car to leave to bring Andy home, and I'd forgotten the keys.
Julie told cops she asked Andy to run back up to the front door to fetch the forgotten car keys. Andy finds the front door is stuck, so she rings the doorbell. Who opens the door but Tommy Skakel? But the ringing doorbell hasn't only summoned Tommy. Ken Littleton and 9-year-old Stephen, the youngest Skakel, also stand in the doorway. Tommy hands Andy the keys as Ken looks on. Andy returns to the station wagon, hands Julie the keys, and Julie speeds off towards Andy's Riverside neighborhood. Julie then manages to make it back to the Skakel house at about 9:45, in time to see the big reveal. Apologies for the spoiler, but guest star Larry Hagman, who would go on to play J.R. Ewing on Dallas, is revealed to be the murderer of the Broadway producer. Lunny tracked down the precise time of that commercial break from Channel 4, the local NBC affiliate, 9:23 p.m. So Keegan and Lunny had Andy Shakespeare and Ken Littleton corroborate that there had been a car key handoff at the front door between Tommy and Andy close to 9:30. Meaning Tommy was inside the house right around or shortly after the time he'd been telling cops he'd said goodbye to Martha near the driveway. Here's Andy Shakespeare.
And then about 9:30, Jill and I went to the car, we got me home, and the keys went in the car, so I went back to the house. Then Tommy, Ken, and Tom Stephen opened the door, got me the keys.
Tommy now had 2 alibis from 2 non-family witnesses. One at about 9:30 at the front door by both Andy Shakespeare and Ken Littleton, and one at about 10:20 in his father's room, also by Ken Littleton. Over the years, this part of the story has become almost like a play in my head, with these various characters rushing around the stage in order to make their marks and follow this fast choreography. What I always come to is this. Based on all the information the cops had in 1976, it's an incredibly tight timeline. Assuming the attack is shortly before 10 p.m., after handing the keys off to Andy at the front door at 9:30, Tommy would have 50 minutes to either reunite with or chase Martha, beat her with the Tony Penna Golf Club, and drag her almost 100 feet to the hiding place under the pine tree, all while the Ix-Dog is barking his head off, and then reappear in his father's room at 10:20, looking to Ken unmussed, unperturbed, and blood-free. Not to mention at some point, he'd have to get rid of both his bloody clothes and the golf club grip without being noticed. It would be a challenging feat of athleticism and cold-blooded composure for even a trained killer. Was it even humanly possible for a 16-year-old? Still, as the fall of 75 turned into the winter of 76, Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny were convinced that they could nail this on Tommy, if only they could get him to confess. And remarkably, Rush Skakel seemed to think giving the investigators full access to his kid was an excellent idea. One of the great canards of the Moxley murder investigation is that Rush Skakel stonewalled the cops. This idea totally permeates the media coverage of the case. Any defense lawyer worth her salt would have told him under no circumstances should he allow his teenage son to meet with police, at least without an attorney present. But Rush allowed cops to interview Tommy for almost 4 hours straight on Halloween without an attorney or any other adult in the room, and then again on December 13th. I mentioned the 2 polygraphs. Rush consented to both. The police didn't need a search warrant. Rush signed a consent to search the Skakel home, which specifically acknowledged he was waiving his constitutional rights and provided they could remove anything they wished. He also turned over the keys to the family's ski house in Windham, New York, where several of the Skakel kids spent the weekend after Martha was found. Rush must have loved having cops around. For the first 6 weeks of the investigation, he allowed them to use his house as their Bellhaven HQ. Ethel Jones, their cook, even fed them. Stephen Skakel, his youngest son, who was 9 years old at the time, remembers the house being full of Greenwich PD.
I remember 1 or more cops almost on a daily basis at the house. I mean, Ethel would make them breakfast, would make them lunch. They had free reign of the house. I remember crawling into in the basement. There was a crawl space. It would be hard for an adult to get into. I remember crawling in there looking for golf clubs, thinking it was a game.
You'll notice Stephen's voice is odd. After 9/11, he was working for AmeriCares, a relief organization, and spent months in the rubble at Ground Zero. He's had a host of health problems as a result, including throat lesions and scarring that make it so he can't speak above a whisper. I've known Stephen for almost 10 years, and it took me almost 10 years to learn that. We talk exclusively about the case, and that's the way he wants to keep it.
I'm not talking about it on this. That's pandering.
You think?
I do. Nothing to do with the case.
You'll be hearing a lot more from Stephen. Although I imagine he'll scoff at the suggestion, I think of Stephen as a man who's devoted his life to trying to reverse what looks like the latest manifestation of the Skakel curse. This time, not premature death, but his family's nearly 50-year entanglement with a brutal murder. Maybe finally accomplishing what his father couldn't. Rush Skakel Sr. died in 2003. The cause of death? Frontal lobe dementia. When I discovered that in January of 1976, he signed an authorization to allow cops access to Tommy's medical and school records, it occurred to me that he might have been cognitively impaired even back then, or his alcoholism was so severe that it had blown out even basic decision-making ability. Given Tommy's violent fits, what possible conclusion could his father have drawn by the police's intense interest in picking through Tommy's medical records? A father who's not quite all there. It's something I'm personally familiar with. My family called my father, his name's Ed Goldman. They called him Special Ed. My father was not he missed a lot. And sometimes when I read about your father, I kind of was your father, it didn't seem like it seemed like he drank a lot.
When my mother, who was the, center of his world, passed away, it devastated him. And it wasn't something that happened overnight. It was years of her being ill, and it just wore him down. And then overnight being stuck with 7 kids. I just don't think he knew how to handle it.
It took an outsider to show Rush Sr. that he'd goofed trusting the cops. On January 19th, 1976, Greenwich police, still on the hunt for enough evidence to finally nail Tommy, stopped by the Whitby School, a private elementary, to take a gander at Tommy's file. What investigators may not have realized was that Rush Sr.'s older sister Georgianne, Jimmy Terrian's mother, had been instrumental in founding Whitby, a lay Catholic school that started the Montessori education craze in America, and had even provided them with a corner of her Greenwich estate for their schoolhouse. Whitby administrators immediately recognized what Rush Sr. had not. His actions were allowing police to build a case against Tommy. Whitby's headmaster and the school's legal counsel called Rush in and explained, gingerly, that the school thought his decisions to give the cops carte blanche had been utter madness. How did Rush react to this? Besides reaching for the scotch, I imagine him holding his face in his hands and weeping. That very day, he hired a seasoned Stanford criminal attorney to represent Tommy, Emmanuel Manny Margolis, who told the cops their backstage passes into the Skakel family had been revoked.
They had free and open access to the house and to all of us until Manny Margolis stepped in and did what any lawyer would have done.
After Manny Margolis cut the cops off, Detective Lunny took to hunting down Tommy on the streets of Greenwich and yelling trash talk, saying it was only a matter of time before they nailed him. For Rush, that seems to be about the time when reality finally started to sink in. Shortly after realizing that Tommy was the police's prime suspect, he was next door at Sissy Icks's. Sissy was the mother of Helen Icks, Martha's friend who was with her at the Skakels on Mischief Night. The Ickses were the Skakels' closest friends. Sissy and Ann Skakel had been tight since their days at Manhattanville, the preferred women's college for Catholic girls of means.
She was one of my mother's best friends. After my mother died, my father had a very difficult time, and one of the, side effects was drinking.
When her friend Ann died, Sissy did her best to look after Rush. It was Sissy who would come over and dump Rush's booze out while he was off on his periodic trips to rehab. Sitting in her living room, Rush began to hyperventilate. Sissy called an ambulance, which sped him to Greenwich Hospital. Rush told doctors he thought it was his heart, but it was more likely a panic attack. It's understandable. Skakel family legal papers I've reviewed confirm that at this juncture, Rush had started to believe the cops when they told him Tommy had killed Martha, and that he was harboring, in the words of one memo, a monster in his household. Soon after, police presented Rush with a psychological profile of the killer. According to a legal memo from Tom Sheridan, the profile, quote, literally scared the wits out of the father of 6 young children. In the face of his continuous denials, Tommy was brought in for a complete neurological examination to a leading psychiatrist, Stanley Lessie, MD. Tommy would stay under the shrink's care for 2 weeks, during which time Lessie would inject him with sodium amytal, a truth serum, and interview him about his activities the night Martha Moxley died. It's a test the cops had requested. Manny Margolis explicitly advised against the trip, but Rush still seemed unable to resist giving the cops everything they wanted. Tommy wept as the needle slipped into his arm, cried out, "Please take it out." When it was all over, Leslie told Rush that based on everything he'd seen, Tommy had absolutely nothing to do with Martha Moxley's death. For obvious reasons, things had been a bit strained between the Skakels and the Moxleys, but Rush bounded over to the Moxleys' house and excitedly shared the news. Here's Detective Lunny again.
He made that visit over to Mr. Moxley and said, "For your benefit only, for your peace of mind, and I have some peace of mind today, I want to tell you, my son was tested. He didn't commit this murder. The doctors are saying it, and I want you to know that."
It must have been a perplexing visit. Rush was certainly relieved, but it suggested to the Moxleys that perhaps they were no closer to prosecuting Martha's killer. These suspicions were confirmed when Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny visited them one evening 3 days later, on April 1st, 1976. Bad news, they reported. They'd made their case to Don Brown, the Fairfield County State's attorney, and he pronounced the evidence against Tommy Skakel too flimsy to try. There was no way they were going to get a conviction based on dog barks and a fib about homework, Brown told them. The investigators were frustrated. They'd felt so close, but they must have understood Brown's point. They'd failed to get a confession or any evidence that could really pin this murder on Tommy. Square one, it seemed. At least for the investigators. The whole experience seems to have taken quite a toll on Tommy. In April 1976, not long after Don Brown opted not to charge him, Tommy showed up to the Greenwich Hospital ER, doubled over with stomach pains. Hemorrhagic gastritis was the diagnosis, bleeding from the stomach that's often brought on by excessive drinking or stress or both. By that time, investigators were already sniffing out a new lead, courtesy of Sissy Ix, who appeared at the police station the day after detectives met with the Moxleys to tell them they wouldn't be arresting Tommy. Few were as devoted to Rush Skakel as his late wife's best friend, but Sissy was also about as chatty as they come. And it's clear from police reports that over the years, cops came to see Sissy as a reliable correspondent to the goings-on within the Skakel house. Sometimes interlocutor, other times informant. Here's Sissy, years later.
This was so hard for me because Dorothy was a good friend of mine. The Skakels are a good friend of mine. I mean, I was just sick about that. I mean, and the whole thing was so terrible to me dramatically. And I love Martha. You know, she lived at my house. You know, it was really so hard for me. And so we would try and figure out who in the world could have done this thing.
At the station, Sissy told Captain Keegan and Detective Lunny all about Tommy's visit to Columbia Presbyterian. She said she'd even seen the needle marks up and down Tommy's arms from the sodium amytal injections. While telling them that she never suspected Tommy, she did also let it slip that the reason that the Whitby school had been so protective was that his school records included accounts of blackouts. It was that day that Sissy put a bug in their ear about someone else in the Skakel household, a person they'd never once considered. Did they have any idea what a weirdo he was? The tip turned out to be a good one. Was the person she described indeed a weirdo? Unquestionably. A psychopath? Quite possibly. Soon, new cops would take over the case, and they'd pursue Sissy's hunch for the better part of a decade. Next time on Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley murder.
I see myself as a very complicated individual who got involved in a mess that screwed up his life.
The whole thing, for me, was a bit of a shock. 2 policemen out of the blue.
If you think you're going to get away with this shit, you're mistaken. Very mistaken.
From NBC News Studios and Highly Replaceable Productions, Dead Certain, the Martha Moxley murder is written, reported, executive produced, and hosted by me, Andrew Goldman. Alexa Danner is executive producer and head of audio at NBC News Studios. Megan Shields and Rob Heath are producers. Nora Battelle is our story editor. Fact-checking by Simone Buteau. Production assistance by Brendan Weissel. Sound design by Rick Kwan and Mark Yoshizumi. Original music by John Estes. Bryson Barnes is our technical director. Amanda Moore is our production manager, and Marissa Riley is the director of production. Liz Cole is president of NBC News Studios. Thanks for listening. New episodes of Dead Certain, The Martha Moxley Murder, drop Tuesdays through January 20th.
This week on Meet the Press, after Democrats swept key races on Election Day and amid a record-breaking government shutdown, Kristen Welker sits down with House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and Senator James Lankford, plus a Meet the Moment conversation with John M. Chu. This week on Meet the Press. Listen to the full episode now wherever you get your podcasts.